zero in on the locations that were
But we shouldn't jump to any conclusions about what happened without knowing the details, nor should we jump to any conclusions about anything that should be done.
Mr. Haig, thank you very much indeed for coming out to talk to us this morning.
Thank you.
Well, there you are, Mr. Haig, announcing that normal political activity for... And as you heard, the Leader of the Opposition, William Hague, talking about a period of suspension of political activity, which he is calling for. He says he hasn't talked to the other political leaders about it, but that is his suggestion in the wake of this tragic death in a car crash of the Princess of Wales. He talked about her being a shining individual and the great shock and sadness that would have been felt by everyone throughout the country to wake up this morning to that sad news. She was unique, very lively and attractive as an individual, he said. That is how we will remember her, and we will recognise and salute her charitable work. Jenny, we've had these tributes from the politicians now, all of them clearly deeply moved by what we've seen. But can you tell me what you think is going to be the implications, the repercussions of this as far as the royal family is concerned?
Well, I think they're going to take a very long time to gather themselves together and assess just how major this impact is. Two young boys now left without their mother, two young boys who've had a very difficult life thus far. Diana was doing her very best to bring up William as a worthy future king, and she felt she still had some work to do in that direction. They will take a very long time to gather themselves together, and I hope there won't be too many recriminations in these early days amongst themselves. I mean, Diana herself admitted she had a difficult and at times sad life within that family, but no one could have predicted that this would happen. There are tributes coming in, of course, from her friends now as well as politicians. The latest is from Jemima Khan. She was very close to Jemima Khan, the wife of Imran Khan. And she said she was horrified, lost for words, and said of Diana she was an amazing and remarkable woman, a loyal friend, and a genuine crusader who did a great deal for others. And I think that is how she will be remembered by very many people.
Jenny Bond, our court correspondent, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you, Mr. Bowden, as well, for joining us. And because of today's tragic events, the BBC has changed its television schedules for the rest of the day. At midday, we'll resume full coverage of the events so far today. But first, details of those changes to the BBC schedules coming up in just a few seconds.
Again, we've been watching the BBC coverage of Princess Diana's death. Princess Diana died last night in Paris after leaving dinner at the Ritz Hotel. She apparently was being followed by a number of paparazzi. Her car was trying to speed away from these motorcycles that were coming after them. Her driver lost control as the car entered a tunnel along the River Seine. The car apparently crashed against a divider, then slammed against the wall. The car was destroyed. Princess Diana's recent companion, Dodi Al-Fayed, there we're seeing pictures of the car. As you can see, there was very little left of it. Princess Diana's companion, Dodi Al-Fayed, was killed instantly, as was the driver. A bodyguard that was traveling with him is in critical condition at a Paris hospital. Princess Diana was taken, that a picture of Dodi Al-Fayed, an Egyptian, very rich Egyptian that Princess Diana had been seeing in recent months. Princess Diana was taken to a Paris hospital. She died there a couple of hours later. Apparently doctors there did their best to revive her, but the internal injuries were such that the internal bleeding was so much that there was simply nothing that they could do for her. There have been statements of sympathy and condolences from leaders throughout the world, including President Clinton, who said that he and Mrs. Clinton were very fond of Princess Diana and that they were deeply saddened. The Prime Minister of England, of Great Britain, Tony Blair, said that he feels like everyone else in this country, utterly devastated. He said that England is a nation in shock, in mourning, and grief that is so deeply painful for them. And let's listen a little more to what Mr. Blair had to say.
We are today a nation in Britain in a state of shock, in mourning, in grief that is so deeply painful for us. She was a wonderful and a warm human being.
Again, recapping the tragic news of the day, hundreds of mourners have gathered outside Kensington Palace, Diana's home in London. They are expressing their grief by dropping off cards, by dropping off flowers, lighting candles in honor of the princess. Hundreds more are mourning at Buckingham Palace. Diana again died from injuries suffered in a violent car crash in Paris. Her car had been traveling at high speed through a tunnel along the River Seine when her driver lost control and slammed into a tunnel wall. The accident also killed the driver and Princess Diana's recent companion, Dodi Al-Fayed. A bodyguard traveling with them was seriously injured. This all happened as the car was apparently being chased by photographers on motorcycles. French police are said to be questioning about a half dozen of the paparazzi in connection with the tragedy. In South Africa, Princess Diana's brother was furious at the tabloid press that he said hounded his sister. And again, in London, Prime Minister Tony Blair expressed his sadness at the events of this night. President Clinton has also expressed his sadness. He's on Martha's Vineyard. His family is vacationing there. The president issued a statement saying that he and Mrs. Clinton were very fond of the princess and were profoundly saddened by her death. The president is scheduled to make a public statement at 9:30 Eastern Time. Prince Charles had to break the news of Princess Diana's death to their sons, William and Harry, at Balmoral Castle in Scotland, where they were vacationing. Prince Charles is expected to travel to Paris today, accompanied by the British Prime Minister. They will then take Princess Diana's body home to London later today. Now, for most of the past 2 decades, Princess Diana has captured the world's imagination. Hers was an extraordinary life, a fairy tale that even before today's tragedy had no happy ending. With more on Diana's life, ABC's Beth Nissen.
The willowy young woman born as Lady Diana Spencer was the focus of world attention for 16 years, beginning with her storybook wedding to Prince Charles in July of 1981, a ceremony watched on television by an estimated 750 million people worldwide. Within a year, Diana had given birth to Prince William, heir to the throne of England. A second son, Harry, was born 2 years later in 1984. The woman, by then known as Princess Di, devoted herself to raising her sons, raising funds for charities, raising public awareness of AIDS. She was always in the sights of the paparazzi, who flash-framed every change in the royal hairstyle, royal dress designer, and royal weight. The princess would later confirm that she suffered from bulimia for years.
Like a secret disease you inflicted upon yourself because your self-esteem is at a low ebb and you don't think you're worthy or valuable.
Diana's marriage to Prince Charles was apparently as unhappy as the princess was. By the early 1990s, the palace was besieged by regular reports of marital arguments and extramarital affairs on both sides.
My husband and I had to keep everything together because we didn't want to disappoint the public. And yet, there was a lot of anxiety going on within our 4 walls.
In late 1992, the royal couple officially separated. They were divorced last year. Since then, Diana has tried to build a role for herself as a global goodwill ambassador, using her celebrity to bring attention to the damage done by landmines and to the ravages of war in Bosnia. But her personal life always seemed to draw larger headlines than her charity work. Most recently, her reported romance with Harrods department store heir Dodi Al-Fayed. A photograph of the two kissing was splashed on front pages throughout Britain. Just last week, the princess was quoted as saying that she longed to get away from the prying press, even move away from England if it were not for her sons. She was in Paris with Al-Fayed, their car closely followed by the usual press of paparazzi when the crash occurred, killing the chauffeur and Al-Fayed and fatally injuring the princess, who died in a Paris hospital. She was 36. Beth Nissen, ABC News, New York.
For more on Princess Diana's death and reaction around the world, we now join ongoing live coverage of England's BBC.
Those who witnessed the aftermath of the accident knew the gravity of what they were seeing.
We saw a large blue Mercedes, darker blue, and the airbag on the passenger side was deployed. And we saw a lot of liquid on the ground, and we didn't know who it was at the time. Somebody came running towards us, speaking French, shouting in French, and we thought for some reason it was going to blow up in the tunnel. We stood there, watched a little bit, and police came about 7 to 10 minutes later, ambulance about 15 minutes later.
At the hospital, there was no word on the princess's condition for several hours. But inside, doctors were fighting to save her. She had severe internal injuries and underwent emergency surgery. But just before 5 o'clock this morning, the French Interior Minister Jean-Pierre Chevènement broke the tragic news that the princess had died.
Au nom du gouvernement français,
he expressed the regret of the French people, but it was the British ambassador to Paris who voiced the deep shock and sorrow that was felt by all.
Tonight's accident is a terrible tragedy. The death of the Princess of Wales fills us all with deep shock and with deep grief. And our thoughts and our prayers are with her family and her friends, and with the family and friends of the others who died in the accident. The Queen and the Prince of Wales and the Prime Minister have been informed of the accident and of the death of the Princess of Wales. I should like to take this opportunity to thank the Minister and the French authorities and the medical team here at this hospital for all they have done tonight at the time of this terrible tragedy. Thank you.
7 photographers were arrested immediately after the accident and driven away by police for questioning. Their motorbikes and scooters were also taken away for further investigation. The high-speed chase involving the paparazzi is thought to have begun as the couple left the Ritz Hotel, where they'd been having dinner. The hotel belongs to Mr. Al Fayed's father, and the man driving them was a security agent from the Ritz. Mohammed Al Fayed's spokesman says the whole family is devastated.
I've spoken to Mr. Al Fayed, and his view is that this is an appalling and quite needless tragedy. The world has lost a princess who is simply irreplaceable, and Mr. Al Fayed has lost his beloved eldest son. Mr. and Mrs. Al Fayed are devastated by their loss, and they share the sorrow of the princess's family.
Political reaction to the tragedy was swift. The Prime Minister spoke of his sorrow at the news.
Our thoughts and prayers are with Princess Diana's family, in particular her 2 sons, the 2 boys. Our hearts go out to them. We are today a nation in Britain in a state of shock, in mourning, in grief that is so deeply painful for us. She was a wonderful and a warm human being. Though her own life was often sadly touched by tragedy, she touched the lives of so many others in Britain throughout the world with joy and with comfort. How many times shall we remember her, in how many different ways? With the sick, the dying, with children, with the needy. When with just a look or a gesture that spoke so much more than words, she would reveal to all of us the depth of her compassion and her humanity. You know how difficult things were for her from time to time. I'm sure we can only guess at, but the people everywhere, not just here in Britain, everywhere, they kept faith with Princess Diana. They liked her, they loved her. They regarded her as one of the people. She was the people's princess. And that's how she will stay, how she will remain.
She was an incredible figure. She had real star quality, as we will all never forget. And she used her position to do a great deal of good on drug issues, on AIDS issues, and so on. Of course, she was from time to time a controversial figure. I think it's, as Robin Cook has said, people will need to ask questions about intrusion into private life, but it's also too early to draw any general conclusions from one terrible incident.
For the moment, this is a personal tragedy of the most terrible sort, and I think a sense of loss and grievance for the nation and all who knew her. Her contribution was extraordinary in many ways, to things like HIV, to drugs, to AIDS, to the issue of landmines, for which she became very famous in recent days. And I think we should remember somebody who brought light and colour and compassion to our lives.
And outside the Princess's home, Kensington Palace, the people have begun laying flowers in tribute. Some overcome with their grief. The scenes have been repeated outside Buckingham Palace, with people quietly paying their respects, stunned by the news. At Balmoral, where the royal family is spending the summer, flags are flying at half-mast. It was here that Prince Charles was told of Princess Diana's death, and it was here where he had to break the news to their sons. This morning, the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh went to worship at the local church. The Prince of Wales will fly to Paris this afternoon.
I think at a time like this, we ought to be focusing our prayers on the two boys. Of course, Dodie, who was in the car with her, and the chauffeur, we mustn't forget them either, because they're valuable in the sight of Almighty God. But to pray particularly for the two boys who will now grow up without a dearly loved mother, and they will need the support not only of Prince Charles, but everyone to take account of them as they grow up.
The tunnel where the accident happened has now been reopened, and there too flowers have been left as a mark of people's sorrow. In coming days there will be many questions to be answered about the cause of the accident, but as that investigation gets underway, few have yet grasped the full impact of the tragedy. Alison Holt, BBC News.
Our correspondent James Robbins